Well, this isn't your ordinary kitchen knife, and it's what we're going to make in this episode of Home Built Workshop. I'm Jeff. Stick around. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to this episode of Home Built Workshop. I hope your day is going fantastic. Well, I'm doing a little bit of cleanup around the shop here. You know, with the small space, things tend to get cluttered very quickly, so to try to keep things a little more organized, I try to clean up in between projects, and well, a lot of times I have to do it even in the middle of projects. During that process, I end up moving a lot of things around, digging things out, reorganizing things, and quite often I come across items that I set aside for later and sort of forgot about. Such is the case with this half-used saw blade, and literally, it's half-used. This is the saw blade that I used to make the little cutting irons for the tiny finger planes. I set this aside, kind of forgot about it, and intended to use it for a future project. I guess now is a future project. I'm going to pause my cleanup, and let's see if we can make a knife out of this saw blade. I want to make something that resembles sort of a sheep's foot kind of knife. From my understanding, a sheep's foot has really just a straight blade, very similar to like a straight razor. I want to utilize this hole here, so I'm going to kind of base my sketching around this hole. I don't really have a plan here. I'm just kind of sketching with a Sharpie, and we'll see if we can come up with something that we kind of like. I want to make sure I have enough material here so that the blade is strong enough. I don't want to have this too thin. So there's kind of my basic shape that we can work off of and start removing some material. There, done, perfect. With the basic shape roughed out, now we'll fire up the belt grinder with an 80 grit belt and begin refining the shape. When I first built my belt grinder, it was mainly because I was interested in getting into making some knives like this. I've used this thing for just about every use you can imagine, but I haven't done much knife making. I think the machine's happy now that it gets to actually grind some metal. Well, we're nowhere near done yet, but just holding this rough blank, it fits the contours of your hand amazingly well. I'm surprised. It's very comfortable. I think once we get some scales on there later on, this is going to be really cool. I'm going to use a compass just set to a random width and just try to scribe on here from both sides of my arcs of the handle just to try to get somewhat of a center line. I guess it doesn't have to be exact, but just so I can see really where to drill some holes. I need to drill some holes in this blank, which will be used to insert some brass pins to pin on the handles. Now, since this steel is hardened at some level, I don't want to try using a regular drill bit. While it is possible that I might be able to drill through this steel with a regular drill bit, instead, I'm going to use what's called a center drill. It's typically used in machining operations and something you might use on something like a Bridgeport mill or something like that. It's not normally a tool that you would specifically use to drill holes, but for this application, I think it's going to work just fine. I only need to drill through about this 1/8 inch blade. And now we can head back over to the belt grinder and begin to grind the bevel on this blade. I want to do it now and get most of the material removed because once that's complete, we're going to need to heat treat this. And I don't want to have to do all that much grinding once this is heat treated because I don't want to risk ruining the temper of the steel. So we'll remove the bulk of the material now before we harden the steel. No, I don't have any kind of forge or anything, but just like I did for the finger plane blades, I'm going to use the MAP gas. Hopefully I can get enough heat in at least this cutting edge of the blade that we can get a good heat treat on it. If it doesn't seem to work too well, I do have some fire bricks that I can kind of stack up and maybe try to create some sort of a janky forge, but I want to try this first just by heating it with the MAP torch, and then we'll quench it in some used motor oil. Let's see what happens. I decided right off the bat to try to give this step the greatest chance of success, and I just stacked up a few fire bricks to kind of give me a little bit of a shield and keep some of the heat in there. There was a little bit of a breeze, and I'm trying to keep the breeze off of this part. It took quite a while with this little torch, and it was kind of hard to see because I'm outside in the sunlight, but I finally started to see this thing glowing bright red, and I knew it was time to dunk it in the oil. That smells lovely. I'm pretty sure it got hot enough. It's a little hard to see the color because I'm kind of out in the sun, but I could see that it was glowing red. Well, that felt like it went pretty good. Now we just need to check this with a file. When we pass a file across this metal, now the file should skate over the surface instead of biting into the metal. Hopefully, that's what's happened. And that sounds like, and feels like, the file's skating over the metal. I think that worked. Yeah, if I compare the way the file cuts up here where I didn't heat it to down here, I'd say that metal hardened. Next up is the tempering process. Right now, since we just heat treated this, the metal is actually so hard that it's brittle, kind of like a piece of glass. If you bend a piece of glass, of course it's going to shatter. This could potentially do the same thing. The metal is actually way too hard and it has no bendability. That's a technical term. So if we were to actually put this to use and we put any sort of side load on there, there's a chance that the metal could just snap in half. And of course we don't want that on a knife. So in order to temper this metal, we need to put this in the oven at 400 degrees for 1 hour, and we need to repeat that process 2 times. We're going to bake it for an hour, let it cool back to room temperature, then we'll put it back in the oven for another hour, let it cool to room temperature. From there, we can move on with getting this thing wrapped up. Once this little guy has cooled down, now we can work on getting it cleaned up. I'm just going to use a stick with some sticky back sandpaper and just sand all this crud off, get everything shined up, cleaned up. A few minutes of elbow grease should go pretty quickly. Hopefully, because, well, it's more sanding. I am noticing there's just a tiny little bit of warpage in there. Maybe it moved a little bit during the heat treat process. I'm not worried about it though. It's gonna be fine. After a bit of sanding, I'll use my buffer and shine this metal up. To make the scales for this little knife, I think this piece of black walnut will look really cool. I've put some double-sided tape on the blank. That way I can stick the blade in place and it's going to keep everything secure while I drill these pilot holes. I've got this other piece that's going to end up going on this side, but I want to stick this to the bottom so that I can drill them both at the same time. I'm using the holes I already drilled in the blank to locate where I need to drill the holes into the wood. To make sure nothing moves around while I trim off the excess wood, I'm using the brass pins to hold everything securely. At the front edge of the handles where it meets the blade, I I need to do a little bit of profiling now, because once I glue these handles in place, it's going to be very difficult to shape the material without damaging the blade. So by doing it now, I can get into all the contours I need to, and I don't have to worry about working around the blade later on. With the ends of these roughly shaped, I think now we're at the point where we can go ahead and glue these to the blade. I've got the pins all started in the holes. We'll just mix up some 5-minute epoxy, slather it on there, clamp everything together, and hopefully in 5 minutes, probably more like 30 to an hour, based on past experience. I don't know why 5-minute epoxy doesn't seem to dry in 5 minutes, but we'll get this glued up, clamped together, and then we can finish our final shaping. This is the part of the show where I will put on some gloves, because I don't know why, I can't stand the feel of epoxy. I don't know, it's just weird. Plus it's easier to just throw the gloves away than try to scrub it off your hands. Why does 5-minute epoxy smell so horrible? Ugh. Well, after making a complete mess and completely stinking up the place with the horrible smell of the 5-minute epoxy, we'll just let this dry. Ugh, it smells so bad. Gross. Once the epoxy was completely dry, it's back to the belt grinder to put the final contours on these handles. The belt grinder works great for removing the bulk of the material, but it is a little bit tricky getting the fine details worked out, especially because I don't have any sort of contact wheel attachment for my grinder. So to finish everything up, hand sanding. This handle's feeling really comfortable. I think we're ready to apply a finish. What are we going to apply for a finish? That's an easy one. Super simple, boiled linseed oil. I love the way wood feels with some type of oil finish. Doesn't have to be boiled linseed oil, but for things like guitar necks, knife handles, stuff like that that you really want to feel the wood, some type of an oil finish is my go-to. For this one, it's just going to be regular boiled linseed oil. Just wipe it on. There's that black walnutty goodness. Well, now I think there's really only one thing left to do, and that's to sharpen this up. I'm going to use my TS Prof Cadet Nero sharpening system. This is going to be really easy because this edge is straight. I'll be able to grab a hold of it, and this thing is going to work awesome. Unlike when I made those knives from the horseshoes, there was no way to use any sort of sharpening system. I had to do it all by hand. It took a long time and was pretty awkward. This is going to be a breeze with a system like this. If you'd like to learn more about this TS Prof system, I've got a whole video. I'll put a link in the description. You can check this out, kind of going over the features and really how to use it. Sort of a review, I guess you might call it. Link in the description if you want to check this out. These things work great for sort of normal type of blades. Those weird horseshoe blades definitely doesn't work too well with a system like this, but for normal knives, works really well. One of the things I like most about this sharpening system is the fact that when you need to sharpen the other side of the blade, you just release a lever and rotate it around. You don't have to readjust anything. You don't have to reposition any clamps. You just spin it around and keep sharpening. It's pretty cool. It's also super simple to swap out your abrasives because the abrasive holder is spring-loaded. The very last step that I do, no matter what type of blade I'm sharpening, is to use a leather strop. It finalizes the edge and makes it super sharp. I recommend everybody use a leather strop when you're sharpening. Well, that sharpened up really nice. It is incredibly sharp. At least it feels it. Let's see if it actually cuts. I'll take that. Well, that's going to be a wrap on our little straight edge knife made from a saw blade, black walnut handles. What a fun project. The more time I spend making different knives, the more I realize how much fun it is, and the possibilities are endless. So it's probably safe to say that I'm going to try to do a little bit more of this on and off from time to time, because it really is fun. You can make all kinds of wild creations and have some fun while you're doing it. Hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think of this wild looking blade down below in the comments. Thanks a lot for watching, and we'll see you next time. Man, that's sharp. I wonder if I could shave with this.